Again, everyone, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar tonight on our Newcomb-Tulane College Office of Study Abroad Pre-Departure Orientation for Parents, which is titled Know Before They Go. And so we have a great group of panelists here to answer your questions and provide you with a lot of guidance that'll help you support your student in this very life-transforming experience of studying abroad. My name is Penny Wyatt, and I am the Director of Family Programs. And I'm showing you here on the screen just an outline of the topics that will be covered tonight. Before we get started, I do want to clarify that this particular webinar is for the parents of students participating in one of those Office of Study Abroad Newcomb-Tulane College programs. If your student is a business school student or otherwise participating in one of the Freeman Abroad study abroad or exchange programs, then there's a different webinar for you. And that is going to be held next Wednesday night on March 22nd at 6. So one of my colleagues here has put the registration link for that webinar in the chat, so you can capture that and register for that one instead if that's the one that you belong to. So you'll see this list of topics, so we can go on past that. And I'm happy to introduce our panelists, who are all from the Newcomb-Tulane College Office of Study Abroad within our Center for Global Education. And so I'm happy to introduce Ilana, Aaquil, who is an academic advisor, Siena Farrar, who's the senior academic advisor, Annie Gibson, who is the administrative associate professor, and she's the director of the Office of Study Abroad, and then also Mike Weisnett, who is also an academic advisor. So I will just be moderating the questions at the end. And so I'm going to turn things over, and Annie Gibson, who's the director, will kick off the webinar, and I'll rejoin you at the end for the Q&A. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Again, I'm Annie Gibson, the Director of Study Abroad here in Newcomb-Tulane College, and we are just so excited to have you here today and so excited for your students' upcoming journey to study abroad. We know that study abroad is one of the most transformative experiences of students' undergraduate careers. And we really are so pleased that your student, and we know the whole family has also seen the value that this can add to the educational experience of your Tulane student. So today, we are hoping to go through some of the logistics, some of the concerns, some of the ways in which you can best support your student to go through these next stages of preparation in study abroad, and some things to keep in mind so that you can help guide them to make the most of their experience while they are abroad. We know that families and mentors play such an important role in our students' experiences, and study abroad is especially relevant to this. The more sort of guidance and support that our students have to take initiative and responsibility for going through the logistics that can sometimes feel challenging or overwhelming, and having that support of families to push them along the way to understand some of the complexities is so valuable. So we really appreciate you being here and your willingness to learn a little bit more about the study abroad process in our office. We have record numbers of students studying abroad in this upcoming fall cohort. We have over 670 students on programs in all regions of the world. And we are really pleased to see such a tremendous excitement among Tulane students for engaging globally. So again, thank you for being here. I'm now going to turn over this presentation to our team of academic advisors in study abroad. And these really are the faces that meet with your students, that help them, guide them through these day-to-day questions. I really suggest that, that your students begin to develop relationships with the advisors in our office who are professionals at helping students navigate the academic challenges or questions they may have, the personal challenges that they may have, and really design their study abroad experience to gain the most of it. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Senior Academic Advisor for Study Abroad, Siena Farrar. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, Annie. So my name is Siena Farrar. I'm also a Tulane alum, and I studied abroad during my time at Tulane, and it really was an amazing experience that really helped me become who I am today. So one of the things that's a big logistics piece that your student has been told about, but can be a helpful reminder, is that applying to our office was just the first step. They have essentially applied for Tulane's approval to study abroad, and now they must apply for admission into a specific program. These admission dates can range. Some are due today, some are not due until May, but your student is aware that they need to keep track of those deadlines and that they need to meet them and any application requirements that the program requires. And now I'll kick it off to Mike to kind of explain the difference between our offices.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Mike. I am going to be trading off with Siena here, just so we can kind of get through this presentation without kind of too much hassle and just make it really easy on everybody involved. So I really want to talk right now about the two different offices that are associated with study abroad at Tulane. So the first office is us. That's OSA, the Office of Study Abroad. This is for all majors. But there is actually a second office, and you heard a little bit about this earlier, that's the Freeman Abroad. So this is for business majors only. The programs work completely differently, and they have completely different accreditation and academic processes and ways that students apply. So it really are two separate offices. However, there is still an opportunity for business majors to go on our OSA programs. So this little Venn diagram here, right in the center, that's for business majors who want to complete non-business requirements. So they may have their NTC core requirements, but they could also be working on a minor through NTC or even double majoring. So there really are a lot of options for all students. That Freeman Abroad is specifically for business students, and OSA is open to every student.
So the important stuff, tuition and billing. So Tulane uses what is called a homeschool tuition model, which essentially means that while Tulane students are abroad, Tulane essentially still views them as a Tulane student. So they are charged their current Tulane tuition and academic support fee as if they were physically on campus at Tulane. Tulane uses then this money to pay the program for tuition. So it's essentially setting it up this way allows students to still have access to loans, to their scholarships, to the full fleet of support staff that we have at Tulane University. And what would be paid directly to the program would be housing, any meals if meals are not included, and sometimes health insurance. We'll talk more about health insurance later, but some programs require very specific health insurance that they know works in country or because of visa rules.
Okay, so just a little bit more about how billing actually works. So all approved students, as long as they're going through our office or approved through us, they're automatically registered in a 12-hour placeholder course. What that basically means is that students can no longer then register for classes at Tulane for that semester. It's a placeholder. It's just there so that students have a block on their registration so that we know that they are studying abroad. If a student decides that they want to withdraw from study abroad, it's very, very important that they reach out to us as soon as possible so that we can remove that 12 credit hour placeholder course so they can then register for classes here at Tulane. Billing goes through accounts receivable, and disbursement of scholarships and financial aid occurs based on this placeholder course. So that's one of the other reasons why we do that. Students are not responsible for paying tuition cost to their provider or host university. So what happens is that student continues to pay Tulane tuition, then Tulane pays the program on the student's behalf. So you pay your tuition through accounts receivable as normal. For housing, a student is going to pay the cost of housing and insurance to the program directly in most cases. So you can kind of consider this being your off-campus insurance and then also your off-campus landlord for the semester. Students can still use financial aid to cover housing costs, but you should really have your student reach out to the financial aid advisor that's associated with them so that they can best plan for how that financial aid is going to be dispersed, when it's dispersed, and how they can best use it. There are a few programs, so Educo in Paris, Reunidas in Madrid, and then Bologna, BCSP. Those have certain housing/insurance costs that are billed via Tulane, but for all other programs, it's through the program provider or university that they're going through. Independent housing is unlikely. So we really want students to be going through whatever processes the program provider or the university has and requires. So in terms of independent housing, it is going to be very unlikely. There are a few edge cases where there may be an exception, but for the most part, we want them on the program housing.
And so why do we use this model? Mainly because it allows federal aid and scholarships to still apply. Also because Tulane students are still technically Tulane students, even though they happen to be elsewhere. It allows for credits to all transfer as general elective credit, at pretty much as long as there is a corresponding discipline. So basically no gym and no cooking classes. As long as they get above a D-, they are still earning general elective credit hours towards the 120 credit hours they need to graduate. We also do this so that we can maintain certain standards of health and safety and security so that they're still within the Tulane network. It can include access, and we will talk more about health and safety later, but it includes access to our emergency evacuation services, to offices around campus if they need additional help through success coaching or tutoring, or even just us. This allows them to still have access to all of the student services they have on Tulane's campus in the first place.
Okay, so a little bit into academics, our favorite part. So course transfer. So as we already mentioned, the courses transfer over automatically when you're going through our OSA pre-approved programs and your students approved through us. So those courses transfer automatically, but they're transferred over as general electives. So major, minor, or core credit can be awarded through the department. So there's basically two kinds of credit transfer approval. There's the university-wide approval for earning that general credit, but then a student also has to go through their major advisor, their minor advisor, or their academic advisor in order to have that credit apply for a specific requirement on their degree audit. So really important note here is that grades from studying abroad will appear as letter grades on the student's transcript, but they will not be factored into their cumulative GPA here at Tulane. The reason for this is kind of twofold. One, if a student's taking classes in their non-native language, then that kind of is a shield against that. But there's also the shield against the different academic situation that they may be undergoing. And there are different academic cultures around how specific, what coursework is expected. And there's also just kind of the different environmental factors of a student actually being abroad. So we want them to be able to challenge themselves and push themselves, but this is a safety net that allows them to do so with relative security. Really important though, those grades will still show up on their transcripts, so they should of course try their best. Students should meet with their advisors, so major advisor, minor advisor, and academic advisor during the application process to discuss prospective courses. A lot of this happens on the back end where you're actually trying to get that credit transferred over and applying for that specific requirement on the audit, but it is really good to preempt some of those conversations just so that the student knows exactly what may or may not count for their specific degree requirements. Freeman students, as I mentioned before, can also participate on OSA programs, but they usually cannot earn Freeman credit. There are some Freeman students that choose to participate in OSA programs to earn NTC or core general credit. And then there may be some cases where a student can earn Freeman credit on an OSA program, but those cases are few and far between.
So one of the most apprehensive parts for your students is the fact that courses may not be finalized until they're on site. This is either because it's a little too far out, they haven't even registered for fall classes here at Tulane. Similarly, they wouldn't register until later there. This might also just be because they, walk into class, end up hating the professor, the subject isn't going to work with their academic curriculum. It's not what they want, and they might change classes then as well. So we always remind students to keep all of their syllabi and coursework, and we really recommend trying to put it into some form of cloud storage just so that they don't lose it. They might not be able to access these syllabi once they return from the program. It's a year later, they're trying to finish all of the paperwork saying that this class will count for their major, but the major advisor won't accept the class unless they see a syllabus. So we always recommend keep those syllabi safe. All students also must maintain full-time Tulane enrollment. This is a non-negotiable, and that is 12 US credit hours. So that is the absolute minimum threshold, although we expect students to adhere to whatever the program's requirement for minimum coursework is. It's usually an average of 15 credit hours. Students are allowed to pass-fail courses, but we do need to know within a timely amount of time, 10 weeks after when the first day of class happened, and they would alert our office and their academic advisor. And this is one that we always prep students for as well. And we talked a little bit earlier with the grades not counting towards GPA, which is that classroom expectations can be really different. In the US, we have lots of little assignments. You have maybe a little bit more of your professor might ask questions and expect the class to respond. This might not be the case in different countries. Some countries are very lecture heavy. Some might only have 2 assignments, the whole course, and they expect students to keep up with the readings, even if there's no little check-in assignment during it. So we like to prep students that this is part of the process. They should be excited to see a different mode of learning. Maybe it works better for them than the US style even does, but that it's a good thing to be aware of on some programs.
All right, health and safety abroad. So you should begin researching on-site support that's available to students. There are certain programs that have more support than others, but for the most part, program providers and universities do a really good job of helping students understand exactly what supports are available. And most of the time, those supports are comparable or sometimes even greater than the support that they can receive at Tulane. So there are lots of different paths forward to accessing that support, but you should probably start with going through your program provider or the direct enroll university that you're working with. And of course, us. Should also research any local conditions that may impact health, especially if you are going to a place that has a really lots of kind of dust contamination, lots of particulates in the air, and you have asthma. It's one of those things that really should be factored into your research prior to actually choosing a program. You should encourage your student to report any and all Goldman Center accommodations to us and also their program provider as soon as possible. Even if they don't end up using it, it's better to have it requested early. This is something that the earlier we have access to having a Goldman Center accommodation, the earlier we can deliver that to the program provider and we can start having those conversations. Some accommodations are easier to fulfill than others. So for things like academic accommodations, those may be easier to accomplish if extended time on tests, things like that. And housing ones may be a little bit more tricky based on what's actually able to happen based on the resources that are available to the local university or the program provider. So it's best to have this conversation early on, and we can also be flexible about what programs we then are working with students with that have maybe more specific accommodations that we can utilize there. Should also plan a method to stay in touch with whatever current healthcare providers that the student's currently receiving. So therapists, primary care physicians, specialists, whoever it ends up being, keep those relationships going while abroad, even if you don't end up having a lot of communication between them. If you do need medical services abroad, having that kind of documentation would be really helpful. Also, research medication laws for whatever host country your student's going abroad to. Not all medications are legal to import in all countries. This is particularly the case with a lot of antidepressant medications and also ADHD medications. So students should really plan to bring a full supply for their program if that host country allows it. So it's one of those things that, again, have those conversations early with us, with the program provider, so that we can best support students for living their best lives abroad.
So health insurance. So as I mentioned earlier, students will have health insurance while they're abroad, but a really important note is that they must maintain both domestic and international insurance while they're abroad. And this is to ensure that they have continuity of care. So if something happens while they are abroad and they want to be able to come home to receive treatment, there has been no gap in coverage. So we have a couple of different options you can choose from. You can go with GeoBlue, which students can purchase through our office. It's supplemental health insurance that is specifically international. A grand majority of program providers will require program provider specific insurance. They know that it works in country. They know that it satisfies potentially if there's a requirement of a student visa to have a demonstrated amount of health insurance. They know that it will. And potentially your health insurance may have international coverage, but it is a good idea to start that conversation now with your insurance provider to see if they'll still be able to have the coverage, if there are any limitations. Also really important, students still have to complete the annual health insurance waiver. If they do it normally, they should continue to do it. We do not tell the health center that the student is abroad on this particular front, just because it is a waiver that they must legally sign.
And then I know we're still talking about it, but just a brief overview of some of our COVID-19 policies. So Tulane students are required to adhere to all local and program policies regarding COVID-19, regardless of vaccination status. We also recommend that all students get their most up-to-date booster dose if eligible prior to going abroad. And some program locations are more tenuous than others due to case numbers and border restrictions still. So in most cases, program modifications are more likely than outright cancellation, but it's still really important to be keeping that in mind as you're choosing a program and preparing for actually going abroad. We should also remember that program changes can include hybrid/online coursework, mask policies, limitations on independent travel. We've seen lots of different reactions to the ways that COVID-19 has affected different countries and different programs. So it's one of those things that really still does have to be a case-by-case basis and something that requires ongoing consideration.
And so other safety and security, as I mentioned earlier, we do contract with an emergency evacuation service called Crisis 24. You can find out more information about it on Tulane Global. They basically will help evacuate students in case of very dire emergencies. So earthquakes, civil unrest, things like that, where getting out on an airplane is not an option anymore. They will be there to scoop up students. Luckily, we haven't had to use their services in 20-something years. It's been a very long time. We also recommend using travel.state.gov to kind of begin research about their destination, where they're going, if there's any really specific information that may impact them. And we tell all students that they need to register in STEP, the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. It's through the U.S. Department of State, but it basically alerts the local U.S. embassies and consulates that there is an American citizen around in this specific location during this period of time. So they're able to get any health and safety alerts that the government sends out. And if things go wrong, the US government is aware that there is a citizen there.
All right, and we want to go over some travel logistics just so that your student feels as prepared as possible and that you feel prepared in preparing them. So passports and visas, always a hot topic in our office. So for the passport, the student passport must be valid for at least 6 months after their study abroad program ends. So if they don't have a passport or they need to renew them, that should be done immediately as soon as possible. And especially for a fall program, should really pay for expedited service. I also want to mention that if a student did get that passport while they were a minor, I'm not sure the exact cutoff age of that, but that passport may be only valid for 5 years, whereas normally passport is valid for 10 years if a student is getting it as an adult. So make sure to go back and check when that expiry date actually is for the student's passport, so you can renew it if you need to. And then visas. So applying for a student visa is the student's responsibility. So visa requirements, those can vary based on host country, citizenship, and consulate location. You should visit the consulate website for information, but your program provider may be able to offer some guidance. This is actually what they are built to do. So they're probably the best place to go if you do have a visa question and can't get a hold of a consulate. We are not able to consult on specific student visa requirements, nor do we have any sway with any immigration or consulates. So just keep that in mind. We can advise students on what paths forward there are, but as far as what those visa requirements are and how to go about actually applying for them, we are not able to do so. They may also require your bank statements potentially notarized. So that's something to keep in mind. There may be some notarization involved, so check early about those visa requirements so you can schedule a notary appointment. And then one big one is that summer or winter travel may conflict with a visa appointment and then also actually getting a student visa via mail. Some consulates allow you to mail in your passport in order to apply for that visa. However, if your passport is actually in the mail, then you obviously cannot use that passport for travel internationally. So it's one of those things to really plan ahead for, especially we see students wanting to do international trips prior to their fall programs. And that causes a lot of tricky situations because if you are applying for that visa, you will not have a passport to do international travel. So just something to keep in mind. Ultimately, a student may need to decide between summer and winter travel or their fall or spring program. So that is an unfortunate eventuality, but it is a potential one.
Yeah, and there is the potential to apply for a second passport. However, we really cannot help with this. And we have seen students get their original passport essentially voided because the passport office thinks they are just applying for renewal instead. So it is something to look into, but take it with a grain of salt. Yeah. And so booking travel. So Tulane requires all Tulane students on Tulane approved programs to book through our travel provider, World Travel Services, so that there is continuous support. When I was working, in this office when COVID first happened, and for students who were able to book through World Travel, they were amazing. And I know that I use them for my travel, and that especially with how disruptive airline travel has been over the past couple of years, where things get canceled, there's the first leg out of, I don't know, your first connection disappeared off of your travel itinerary and you don't know why. They are really amazing. And all students have been made aware of this. But this is just for continuous risk management, and so that they are still within the Tulane kind of circle. Essentially, if you do want to use miles or points to book your student's flight, the student must basically rescind their ability to then use World Travel. World Travel is only able to help World Travel students or customers. So if they book through points, if they book through Expedia, they will not be able to access these services, and they cannot use, for example, during COVID, when there was students needed emergency rebooking, Tulane was able to give financial support to some students who really needed it. They would not be able to access that financial support either. So the more fun part.
Yeah. Life abroad. What does living actually look like and how do they navigate it? Okay, so you may or may not have seen this kind of a graph before, but your student is very, very likely to go through culture shock. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is and then kind of how the kind of stages go through. So your student is likely to go through this no matter how different or similar their host country is. Even a place that speaks English that you'd think was roughly comparable and similar to the US, like Ireland, you are still going to experience a significant amount of culture shock. So as advisors, the shock stage is also when we get the most amount of calls. So you can see stage one is euphoria. It's super cool to be in a new place. You're experiencing new things for the first time. You're seeing the sights, you're hearing the sounds. Everything is great. You're trying new food. And then slowly over time, you may kind of fall into this shock. So that is that period kind of right after you may be getting a call, wow, everything is so awesome. The next one, maybe things are really, really tough. But I really strongly recommend to you to encourage a growth mindset by using yet language. So this can look like, I don't know what a professor is saying in class and I can't keep up. And you could respond with, I hear you, and that's frustrating. But as you keep going to class, you'll get more and more practice and it'll be easier. You just haven't gotten there yet. And I think that's really what study abroad is really all about, is getting to that place of where you want to be. But you're not going to be there right away. And that's part of why study abroad is so amazing. There is a transition period where you still keep going through those ups and downs. But ultimately, we really hope that by the end of a semester or a year abroad, hopefully students can get to that acceptance place. Unfortunately, that usually ends up happening right as a student is about to leave, but that just means they'll have to go back.
Yeah, and I was talking to a student over Zoom the other day. She's really deep in the culture shock stage. She was crying during the appointment. Everything was going wrong. And I get an email from her the next week saying, you know what, that was just one bad day. How can I apply for another year abroad? I can't wait. So I think it's important to keep in mind that, you know, the way that we're able to be so interconnected and in communication with each other means that, you know, your student's always going to rely on you for support. You are their parent, you are their guardian, but you're also going to see those snippets of bad days a lot, but maybe not the euphoria moments when they're climbing the top of Table Mountain or eating tapas or doing whatever all the fun things are because they're having too much fun. So housing abroad, this is a really important topic. Students should really think about and understand that housing is going to be different regardless of where they are in the world. Most students, especially in Europe, students are going to have a 40+ minute commute pretty much no matter where they're going. This is less than, you know, the university staff, their professors probably commute. And a lot of the time, it's probably going to be through public transportation, through walking, through riding a bike, however it is. But they should go into this knowing and expecting that there will be some commute time. I think it's really helpful to frame it to them as, you know, it's a lot different when you're passively commuting, you know, via public transit, rather than the active commute of driving. You know, we always encourage students not to compare housing. Pretty much, unless they're in a dorm, homestays can really vary across the world. And, you know, it's important to kind of contextualize it. They should always try to not make any big decisions in those first couple weeks. You know, euphoria stage can be really short and then it hits culture shock. But sometimes, and as we've seen, it just takes a little bit of time to adjust. And independent housing, as we said before, is pretty much never allowed. A lot of this is just because of safety and security and maintaining continuity of care. We have not in any way vetted independent housing. It can be really incredibly hard to find a short-term lease. You know, there's the potential safety risks of it, the legality of it. You know, you're signing a lease in a country where you might not be familiar with the local rental laws or landlord-tenant rights, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty much no to independent housing, but for almost every single program in our portfolio, there is guaranteed housing with other students.
And then just more of life abroad itself. So one of the big things we're seeing right now is surrounds making friends and feeling or being alone. So I will just say this right up front, that being alone is never a complaint that we receive from students. Students from both Tulane and other US-based universities participate on these programs. There are going to be a lot of students, not only just from Tulane alongside your student, but other US-based students as well. But there's also, and I think this is super crucial, the opportunity to make new friends with US students, but also students from their host country. And if it were me, I would remind them of their freshman year. Maybe they knew some people coming into Tulane, but for the most part, they probably didn't know that many people. But they're likely having friends now, and it will be a similar experience abroad. From my own experience, I can say that studying abroad builds really fast friendships that happen quickly, but also last a long time. And it happens quickly because you're experiencing the same things together, you're going to the same places, you're having similar things happen to you and things that you're doing. It makes for friendships that happen really, really quickly. This is also an opportunity to build a global network well after you actually come back from studying abroad too. So I'm still in contact with a number of people that I met and worked and lived alongside when I studied abroad. And with about 50% of Tulane students going abroad in general, there are likely to be some familiar faces on either the program or in the city that they're studying abroad in. For airport travel, I know this is sometimes a concern for students as well. Some programs do have airport pickup, but some don't. So you should always be having that conversation about how landing looks in that country, what the start of the program looks like, what you're doing prior to the program start date if you are arriving early in the country. Those sorts of things should happen early on so that you have a plan for what it's going to look like when you actually get on the ground. You should also have your students save the address of where they are going in their phone, but also on paper. It's not antiquated yet. It's worked for thousands of years. Write stuff down. It's really, really good, especially in a new place. Maybe you saved all of your documents on Google Drive or Google Docs, and then all of a sudden you're in a new place. For whatever reason, your international plan isn't working. It's always a good idea to have some documentation on paper. Also, to pack essentials in your travel-on. So you'll have a travel-on bag, but also checked luggage, most likely. You want to make sure that you have some emergency supplies, change of clothes, toothbrush, toothpaste, those sorts of toiletries, but especially medication, easily accessible, both in the airplane and then just in case luggage is lost for whatever reason. Does happen from time to time, although rare. So that's especially important to make sure you have an emergency kit kind of in your travel-on bag.
Yeah, so talking to your student abroad, one of the things that we really recommend is, if your phone contract has ended and the phone is now unlocked, or if you can pay down a phone contract so that you can unlock your phone with your service provider, this allows students to purchase a local SIM card rather than paying by the day through, Verizon or whatever, where it's $10 a day to have an international plan. Most of the time, pretty much everywhere else, that SIM card will be exponentially cheaper, $14 for 10 gigs of data kind of thing, or probably less than that. But students have also recommended Wi-Fi based calls, using WhatsApp, FaceTime audio, Facebook Messenger to have calls so that they can do it over Wi-Fi. One of the suggestions I loved from one of our peer advisors this year, where, his reception was a little spotty, he wasn't able to talk to his parents very much, was that he had made a virtual photo album, I think through just like Google Photos, where he would upload photos of his entire experience. When he was too busy to talk, he could still show his parents what he was up to. So money abroad, students should research the kind of culture surrounding money before they go. Is the country they are going to really cash heavy, or is Apple Pay a thing? Is it mostly credit cards? Finding out that answer in advance is really helpful, and that way they can also alert their banks about international travel. This has been less of an issue as of late, but it's still better to alert your bank just in case, so that they're not cut off from funds while they're there. Maybe helping them set a budget so that includes all of their out-of-pocket spending. If they're taking a trip to a different country, they still have to purchase soap while they're abroad, souvenirs for you and the family. All of those things, maybe sitting down and help them budget can be really helpful. And then eating. So if students are living in a homestay, which I always recommend, I loved my host family and I loved being a host family. They'll get a minimum of 2 daily meals and up to 3. Students should kind of know what they're planning on eating, if they're able to cook for themselves, maybe might be time to practice cooking, or if they'll be eating out for the majority of their meals. And another really important one that kind of also ties into health and safety is that if your student has a really specific diet, they should begin researching how they can maintain that diet while they're abroad. A lot of the times it is very doable to accommodate whatever food rules or restrictions someone has, but it can help to have advance notice just to know how much easier or harder it can be.
Something that we have been seeing pretty commonly, depending on the place that students are actually going to, is labor action. So some countries have very strong labor rights and strikes may occur. Particularly, we've been seeing this a lot in Scotland. This can impact classes if the university goes on strike. I always like to frame this as a really great time for a student to learn about kind of intercultural ways of considering working and living abroad. So it's one of those things that both is frustrating, but also is an opportunity for some real intercultural learning and growth. Do not, however, encourage your student to attend any demonstration. While I'm sure it would be a very culturally enriching experience, we want students to be safe and to not get in trouble with any sort of legal consequences. So do not encourage any demonstrations at all while on site. Also, contacting on-site staff. So you should empower your student to be the first person to reach out to on-site staff. They're the ones that are on the ground with them, and the staff know what the students and are in the same time zone, which is a big thing, especially for studying abroad. Due to local laws, some staff may also not be able to talk to you. Just something to keep in mind as you're preparing to send your student off abroad. So just a couple of other things. Encourage your student not to overpack. This is one of the top things that students regret doing. So I will tell you from my own experience, I brought 2 bags along with me on my way to Ireland. That was completely enough. So do not overpack. The more stuff you have, the more stuff you have to manage. So just enough is what you're aiming for. With around 50% of Tulane students going abroad, there are likely to be familiar faces on either the program or in town. So that'll be an important resource for your students to use. So service and emotional support animals. Your students should speak to OSA and their host program and university as soon as possible. Some animals may need additional vaccinations, and some countries may not be able to accommodate this flat out. So this is a conversation, again, just like most Goldman Center accommodations, you really want to have with OSA and the program provider as soon as you can. But last thing, you should be encouraging your student to get off social media as much as possible. So comparison is the thief of joy. So while your student's abroad, there are going to be 600 other students abroad across the globe, and they will probably be comparing things on different social medias. So keep that in mind. That is something that will kind of invite feelings of envy and jealousy. So it's one of those sorts of situations that we'd like to stem if at all possible.
And now it is time for questions. We're so glad that we got to speak with all of you today. And now let's see. Summer program in Rome. All right. For OSA run summer in Rome, we have housing that is coordinated and will be provided. All right.
Let me take a moment too. In the chat, we had a few questions come in about Freeman Abroad students who are studying abroad through the Office of Study Abroad. So this year, Freeman Abroad had a large cohort of waitlisted students. And so the Office of Study Abroad opened a particular second round application so that these students could be accommodated on some of our Office of Study Abroad programs. All the information that the advisors just presented is relevant to those students at the Office of Study Abroad. Their courses will come back as general elective credit. Now, the next step for all programs in all majors is that students work with particular departments at the departmental level to see if there are courses that have course equivalencies for the major. Sometimes we have different departments that have lists of these courses that they have essentially pre-approved. So students will know going in whether that this course has approval. In the case of these Freeman students, there are a select number of Office of Study Abroad programs that the Freeman Abroad major department evaluated those courses and essentially did a pre-approval of some of these. So students taking those courses will receive business credit. The Freeman students also have our whole portfolio open. So like the other programs, they can consult with Freeman Abroad on a case-by-case basis if their particular course that they're taking is not on that list. In general, the Freeman Business School allows 6 credits to be transferred back as business credits, except for the case of these particular programs that they have enabled for Freeman students this semester to capture that wait list. And as Siena said, we focus this webinar in general on on semester study abroad programs. Much of this information, it does apply. For those of you that are here, particularly interested in summer study abroad on one of the Office of Study Abroad faculty-led programs, there is quite a bit more support in all aspects for these short-term summer programs. So we do cover all costs of the student housing and the program costs. They will be with Tulane faculty while they're abroad. So there are some slight differences in the case of the summer program. There's a heightened level of support. Summer programs are a great option for first-time travelers, for students that want to test things out before they do a semester abroad.
I just wanted to mention something about what did you mean by in some cases it may be illegal for some staff to talk with students. So just like we have FERPA, so Family Education Rights and Privacy Act in the US, some countries have specific laws and legislation that prevents them with talking to non-students. So it's just one of those things to keep in mind that your program provider may only be able to talk to the student that's actually actively on the program and not their parent.
I think I'll jump in here now and start going through the questions that haven't been answered yet, and then any of the panelists can jump in to answer. So one question is there any specific program information for Madrid?
We have a lot of programs in Madrid. So we were tentatively discussing creating a separate webinar for our parents and alongside Freeman for parents of students going to Spain. Madrid is one of the most popular locations, both at Tulane and then just for US study abroad students in general. So it depends specifically on the program that your student is going on.
So what would you recommend their next step to be then, Siena?
Then I would say confirm which program your student is going on. If they're going through our office, odds are good that they're either going on CIEE or Reunitas. So for Reunitas, students should talk to me because it is a consortium program and is run a little bit more kind of the spirit of togetherness with other universities, but CIEE is a very large program provider that we work with very, very, very closely. Their website is ciee.org. So Charlie Indigo Echo Echo.org. And on there, you'll be able to find the full swath of programs that they have and the specific one that your student is attending.
Okay, so another question that's come up is what if their student does not want to go through a Tulane program? They may find something that's less expensive. what allowances are made for that possibility?
Yeah, I can take this one. So essentially, if a student wants to go through a program that's not through our office and wants to do a leave of absence, that is an option that's open to them. However, I do have to mention some caveats and a little, some couple of concerns that I would have with this. So when you're going abroad on, I was talking before about kind of university-wide approval, credit approval. So when you're going through our office, that stage is already done. The credit transfer is automatic. If a student does decide to do a leave of absence, they would have to go through a leave of absence process with their academic advisor, find a program on their own and kind of go through that process by themselves. And then also at no point in that process would the credit transfer actually be guaranteed until it actually shows up on your student's transcript. So it is a possibility, but it does come with some associated levels of risk. Personally, if I had a friend that wanted to do that, I would not recommend it. I just feel that the potential risk is too great in order for those credits to not be counted. I wouldn't recommend it personally, although it is an option that's available to students.
Okay, so a couple of people have asked about the visa courier service to expedite the visa applications. So that is the subject of one of the webinars we're going to have in April. So it was also mentioned in the for Spain, for those students going to Spain. So there is a webinar, I think it's April 6th, and it was mentioned in the parent e-newsletter that just went out. But I will also give you the links for registering for that specialized webinar in the follow-up email that I'll send you. So I don't know if this person who's asking is asking if there's a visa courier service to expedite visa applications for other countries. So one of the panelists may want to speak to that.
For visa, we really recommend that as soon as your student has been accepted into their program, that they follow up directly with the consulate about the next steps. Also, when you're accepted into your program, there's going to be some information that is sent directly to the student about that program. And there will be some general visa guidance that is given directly through your program provider or host institution. Things with visas change on a regular basis, and things with visas also are dependent on what consulate you're applying for. So even if we say, what is the length of time to get a visa for Italy, this will be dependent on which consulate region that you are applying to. So what we recommend is that right away, right now, as soon as your student has finished their secondary application, that they go ahead and seek the documents that would be needed to apply for the visa and go ahead and make their appointment. We have seen with COVID too that consulates are quite backed up, as there was a large time period when consulates were not operating. And so there's a backup of requests for all types of visa and passport services. So again, because students will be often applying to different consulates in different regions, depending on where they're originally from, these things vary.
Okay, so we're getting towards the end of our time, so I'm going to try to capture a few of the questions that seem to have sort of the broadest application, and then we'll get these questions to the panelists and try to get some of those answers incorporated into the follow-up email that I'll send everybody. First of all, someone said that they tuned in late. They wanted to know whether there will be a recording. So yes, the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, and I will send you that link in a follow-up email. It'll also be posted on the familyprograms.tulane.edu website. So one question that came up was whether or not there's similar information that's provided for the students. So yes, of course. So I'll let the panelists speak to the way that this pre-departure orientation information is provided to the students.
Yeah, so we actually have mandatory pre-departure orientations for all students going abroad on our programs. A lot of the information is very similar to the information we just presented to you, but with a spin on it that's more of a student-facing kind of format. But that is part of our keynote presentation that all students are required to go to. If a student was not able to make that mandatory keynote presentation, there is also a Canvas course that they can complete that has all of this information in there as well. So there are multiple pathways, but most students should by now have received all of this information.
And correct me if I'm wrong, panelists, but I would think too that it is best for the student to be the one who reaches out to the Office of Study Abroad for questions, or they will get more specific information about particular programs and those other orientations that might answer some of the questions that parents are posing. So we're trying to give the most broad information related to the Newcomb-Tulane College study abroad programs, and the students could get that more specific information. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this now, that maybe you'll talk with your students over spring break or some other time, now that they're past midterms, you can have a more robust conversation with them about some of these things. So there's some other questions that are just very logistical, like how do students bring their room essentials to the country? It really may be more that's going to be provided, and they purchase something when they get there. Panelists, if you want to speak to those kind of issues, of like more of like the home goods kind of stuff that they would be thinking about always moving in the fall with that kind of stuff with them. What do how do students usually manage that kind of thing when they're going abroad and they want to limit what's in their suitcases on the plane?
Yeah, most students store their stuff at Tulane the same way they would over the summer between freshman and sophomore year, or drive home and with storage. But we really, like we said before, recommend do not overpack. If something, if that suitcase with the very emotionally charged lamp got lost in the airport, that would be terrible. Those kinds of irreplaceable things should stay home. But in general, most things can be bought on site. Pretty much wherever students are going, there's guaranteed to be somewhere that they can buy whatever it is that they need. But there's a lot provided. The grand majority, students are not likely going to have to buy a bed. I have never heard of a student having to buy furniture before. Usually the worst thing that they have to buy is like towels, or maybe if they want a really specific kitchen utensil that is not provided. But for the most part, whatever they want to have, they can buy on site. I would not recommend in any way the expense of shipping something either.
Let's see. One of the other questions was, can you repeat that information about the process for passports and possibly not having a passport available to travel in the summer before the fall semester begins?
Yeah, so let's take, for example, I don't know, we'll just use a random country, or we'll pretend country. So pretend country here requires that students in May give their passport up to the consulate. The consulate will process it at their own, essentially, discretion at whatever speed they do, whatever that specific consulate does. Some consulates are tied to your permanent home address, some are tied to the university address. But while the consulate has that passport, unless your student is either a dual citizen or has a second passport already, they will not be able to in any way tell the consulate to, hurry up. A lot of them are very backlogged. They will move at the speed they move. There are other consulates who may require in-person appointments at that consulate, like the student must physically go. Like I know for France, this is one of the cases. If they're going to France, they must physically go to a French consulate during a very specific window, usually 90 days before their program starts. And if they do not go to that consulate, they will not get a visa. No one can go on their behalf. It's part of, a background check that the country is doing. And so if your travel dates are during that appointment time, then that's where we have to start having conversations with the student about potentially deferring their semester abroad to a different semester so that they can do their summer travel instead.
I think I'll just take two last questions. And one was whether or not students can apply to study abroad in the fall of their senior year.
Yeah, so that is definitely an option, and it's actually one that we're seeing a lot more kind of post-COVID. So something that I've been seeing a lot, especially with students that are studying abroad fall of their senior year, there's a couple of things. One of them is that students tend to be a lot more prepared for the eventualities of study abroad, I've noticed. So it actually ends up being a really good time for them to do so. They've had a couple of years of undergraduate education under their belt. So a lot of times they are feeling a lot more prepared and kind of are really ready to get out into the world. So that's one aspect. But one of the other things that I think is really good about studying abroad fall semester of your senior year is that a lot of your requirements for your major or your minor may also have already been completed, which really opens up students for taking classes for fun or taking things that they were interested in but weren't able to pursue at Tulane for whatever reason. So there's a lot of really good benefits to actually studying abroad fall semester, senior year. Spring semester is, for obvious reasons, very tricky. We have had it happen, but it may require that a student ends up technically graduating in the winter afterwards. There's other complications there, but fall semester, senior year usually goes off just fine.
And one last question I'll ask on behalf of the parents. Does the T-SHIP insurance offer international insurance? Is it separate from regular enrollment? So I think that you all addressed that, but if you could clarify that Tulane insurance program that's offered, does it apply when students are traveling internationally for study abroad?
T-SHIP does have, so student in the T-SHIP program, student insurance does have the option to add on international insurance. Each person should consult individually about their particular package. Depending on what package that you purchased, there may be an added fee for added international costs. Depending on how much coverage you feel comfortable with for your student, there may be different rates. So check your current T-SHIP plan. See if it covers what you feel is acceptable in terms of the amount of insurance coverage internationally. And there is always the opportunity to up that international coverage as needed.
So I'll just ask the panelists, for those programs, the different programs that students are on, they are receiving information from you or from the program about whether or not a visa is required. Isn't that right?
Yes, they are.
The parents who are asking these questions really need to go back and have a confab with their student about the information the students already received that will answer some of those questions, correct?
Correct.
And Annie, are all of those, I've seen on the calendar and on WaveSync, some of those different pre-departure meetings scheduled. Have all of those concluded now, or are they still ongoing?
No, we have ongoing meetings and pre-departure. So we have completed the keynote speech, which went over a lot of the logistics that we did today. And this keynote is also available online on all of the students' Canvas course. So the students that weren't attending in person can access this Canvas course and see the keynote. Right now, we have many presentations. You can look at our calendar for students that are identity-based, so helping students think about how they will navigate their local cultural context. Our advisors are also meeting with students regularly about program-specific questions that they might have. And as soon as students have completed their secondary application, they are linked to an advisor for their program who then answers very program-specific information.
Great. Thank you very much. So we will wrap things up here. Panelists, are there any last thoughts that you want to add or recommendations that you want to make before we end the webinar?
We thank you for being here. We know that parents and guardians play such an important role in students' decision-making process, and thanks for being a part of this journey.
And so, participants, I will just tell you that this is the first time we've offered this webinar at this moment in time, and that student study abroad journey and then the outreach to families. So we would welcome your feedback if you'd like to email me at families, plural, at tulane.edu. If you have feedback to offer, if there are certain parts that you really appreciated, we'd love to know that. If you've got suggestions for things for the future or recommendations for other content to add in, we'd appreciate hearing your feedback. And if you have suggestions for other webinar topics, I also always offer that you're welcome to send those